I am not a morning person. I will often work late into the night with collaborators as we enjoy those stolen hours after children, spouses, and other distractors have all settled into sleep. This means that when my 8 a.m. alarm went off, 6 hours after I'd headed to bed, I cursed. But I knew there was Bennu science being presented at the Lunar and Planetary Sciences Conference, and I was going to be there via Zoom to hear that science. But I have to admit, I've been largely distracted away from all that sciencey goodness by news that has had me rage eating yogurt. This is life at 50, folks. You rage eat yogurt. It turns out a bunch of missions I love have been given expiration dates. Over the weekend, Congress voted into place the FY 2024 budgets for multiple agencies, including NASA and the National Science Foundation. Since October 1, when the fiscal year started, both NASA and NSF have been working on continuing resolutions and spending very conservatively. Now that we have a budget, the conservative spending isn't going to stop. The agencies are being asked for an overall 2% cut. In combination with inflation rates over 3%, we are looking at a fairly significant cut to the U.S. budget for space science. Exactly what this will mean has been coming out in bits and pieces. The bottom line is this. The decadal surveys are being used as the guiding documents for setting portfolios, and NASA wants balanced portfolios of funded programs. There will be cuts. And if you remember sequestration in 2013, yeah, we're back to that kind of belt tightening. On Monday, in the face of agency-wide budget cuts, I sat through a NASA briefing presented at the LPSC, in which they discussed how NASA is thoughtfully working to decide what programs will be cut and what the Mars sample return mission budget will be set to. It turns out this may have been a bit disingenuous. While the planetary community in attendance was being told to hold tight, messages were already starting to make their way out to mission teams about cuts. I'm still working to track down details, but from what I've found out so far, Chandra, Juno, and Maven teams have all been told it's time to wind up their missions, with deadlines to shut down coming circa 2026, give or take a budget year. At the same time, Hubble will be getting a 5% budget cut. It appears JWST will be okay, and it went over budget again last year, per today's NASA budget webinar. And a whole lot of other missions, programs, and calls for proposals will be delayed or slowed down to extend their spending into different fiscal years. All of this is put into context by NASA Administrator Bill Nelson in his State of NASA address, which was given on Monday. At this point, I have order of 5 hours of NASA budget information from telecons all crammed into my head, and a truly thoughtful reaction is going to need some time to percolate out. Right now, my brain has one loud thought being shouted out into the void. To keep the most necessary NASA missions, as described in the decadal surveys, going into the future, there are going to need to be massive cuts to the budget lines used to pay humans to enable discovery at every level. It's about to get ugly, and JPL's layoffs were only a start. NASA is getting an overall 2% budget cut, but when that trickles down to science budgets, things could look a whole lot worse. In running the numbers, NASA has some of the same problems faced by your average homeowner. There are some places you just can't cut spending. For me, this means paying my internet bill every month or I can't keep my job. For NASA, it means keeping the lights on at NASA centers all across the United States. Clean rooms can't just have things turned down to reduce energy bills. Lights have to stay on. Running facilities like the suite of NASA centers means someone or many someones have to go out and get paid to cut the grass. At the end of the day, there is a baseline budget to running real-world operations that just can't be changed. There are also baseline costs to running missions. We have to have the NASA Deep Space Network talking with our missions, and satellite operators are required along with satellite trackers. So when you add up the baseline costs to make sure NASA facilities aren't getting cited for too tall grass and other basic costs with mission management costs, that 2% budget cut is going to be a whole lot more than 2% when it gets applied to the discretionary items that can be cut. NASA doesn't have a whole lot of discretionary spending. One of the few places cuts are easy is in cutting funding to people, which is a problem. It's NASA and the also cut NSF that fund research at universities, at science centers, at institutes. NASA funds scientists at its own centers. And without NASA and the also cut NSF funding, there really isn't anyone else paying for things like planetary science to get done. Budget cuts are human cuts. I woke up to a tweet from Jonathan McDowell at the Chandra X-ray Observatory, tweeting about colleagues updating their resumes. These folks will look for other jobs in science, but due to these funding cuts contracting our entire profession, the majority of these folks are going to need to find jobs in entirely different fields. May I recommend grass cutting? As long as towns have grass height ordinances, we're going to need people to cut the grass, but apparently not to do the science. And these cuts don't only have consequences to the people who have to find new careers. Sure, it sucks to go from discovering methane in the atmosphere of Mars, a world devoid of cows and lacking a clearly defined source of methane, to instead doing something new, like maybe cutting grass. But what about the people left behind, trying to do all the work and stay paid? In a question asked in today's NASA budget webinar, one brave soul asked, in a question that definitely was also a comment, quote, "When will NASA leadership start taking work-life balance seriously instead of paying lip service to it?" End quote. This person admitted to having to work a 70-hour week just to keep up. It is estimated that in order to stay fully funded with a full-time salary based strictly on statistics, researchers need to submit as many as 15 grant proposals a year. This is based on a 12 to 25% success rate and typically only 2 months of salary allowed per proposal. And we assume some funding carries over from the past. With each grant proposal taking an average of 80 hours of effort to put together, we're looking at 30 weeks of unpaid effort researchers have to do in their spare time just to keep their jobs. Hi. When I rage ate yogurt earlier today, I left no yogurt behind because I have an amazing silicone spoon available on Amazon. If you would like to rage eat yogurt with the greatest efficiency possible, you can. Just follow this link to get the spoon I got. Yes, that is an Amazon affiliate link, and your spoon purchase can help support science communications. The spoon is not a lie. It is a funding source. In order to work full-time, 2,080 hours a year, and submit 15 grants, 1,200 hours a year, basic math says research scientists need to work 63 hours a week. Factor in the fact that we get sick now and then, but the work still has to be done. And add in a dash of needing to peer review research papers and serve on committees. and it becomes normal for researchers to work 70 to 80 hours a week. In response to that question about work-life balance, the person at the podium speaking for NASA responded that they don't want anyone to work that many hours, and they'd like to hear from folks if they find themselves having to work that many hours. But these are people who don't have to apply for grants to get their paycheck. In another question proposed but not actually asked, another researcher at a NASA center asked, quote, "How is the Science Mission Directorate working with program managers to allot directed funding to centers, thereby reducing the need for spending valuable time for research on writing proposals?" End quote. It is acknowledged that the amount of time going into proposal writing is a burden. What is missing is an acknowledgement that anyone not working at a NASA center will never get liberated from having to write proposals. Sure, folks at NASA centers, enjoy your well-manicured lawns while asking for non-competed funds, while those of us out here at nonprofit research facilities work from home and mow our own lawns on top of working 70 to 80-hour work weeks. Jon Stewart-style sarcasm may be the only way to face what is coming to the space sciences. As we look at the coming tsunami of budget cuts, delays, and related loss of jobs in science facilities, I have to say I'm glad I'm not part of the decision-making process. What we're facing is due strictly to congressional decision-making, and NASA is trying to do what is right for our profession with what Congress has allotted. I am glad that NASA is basing all their decisions on what we as a community set as our priorities through our decadal survey programs. This is a nonpartisan, science-focused way to keep us on target to do the highest priority science. My heart is also broken for the folks at Chandra X-ray Observatory who have had stable jobs for years or decades and are now looking at their source of science data and of funding, both going away in one budgetary slash. My heart is broken for all my colleagues facing these cuts and just trying to keep their careers. 3 years from now, when the congressionally mandated budget contractions have hopefully worked their way out of the system, there are going to be fewer experienced people still doing science. And I am already mourning the science these people who are starting new careers will never get the chance to do. I mourn the discoveries they will never make, and the next chapters in the book of the universe that no one will be here to write. Budget cuts are human cuts. That's it. That's the story.